Well, today we are starting a new sermon series for the month of June. And it's one of those things, it's a topic that everybody's talking about in our culture, but we're a little bit scared of it in church for some reason. But we are a church that is not scared, like we sang about earlier here. And so we dive into topics that are a little bit scary because we want to be a church that really is relevant to where the real life stuff happens for us. And so today, I'm going to start a series on sexuality. Next Sunday, Pastor Emma is going to talk, and she's going to talk about pornography. And then the following Sunday, I'm going to talk about sexuality within marriage. And then Pastor Johan is going to wrap up and talk about sexuality and singleness. And so we're going to try to handle these things delicately, but also in a very direct way. Unfortunately, I think that the church's voice in this area has been far too silent, which has led to a lack of morality in the discussion about sexuality. And so we want to speak to that in the coming weeks here. And of course, if you have questions about anything that we talk about, you're welcome to text them to me. My number will be up on the screen so that you can see it there, and I'll try to address those questions as we go along. So some of you will know that our youngest son is a firefighter. He's stationed in Nordegg, just outside of Rocky Mountain House. Some of you know there's a big forest fire going on there the last few days, so he's on that fire, fighting that fire. And most of the colleagues that he works with during the summer are university-age people, 20-somethings. And Josh, if you know him, is very outspoken about his faith and about what he stands for. He doesn't hold back at all. And so when he starts the season, the forest fire season, he's very upfront about his faith. The first day on the job, he'll just say, "Look, you need to know I'm a Christian, and if you don't, criticize me for my faith, I won't criticize you for your faith or your lack of faith or whatever. We'll get along just fine." And then, of course, as they get to know him, they get to find out that his dad is a pastor. And so last summer, they were sitting around the fire one evening, like a campfire, and just chatting. And one of them had this question, which is fairly typical. It's like, "So your dad, like, when he's a pastor, like, what does he do the rest of the week?" So Josh says, "Well, he meets with people, talks to them, tries to help them with their problems and stuff like that." And they're like, oh, okay. So he doesn't have like a normal job? No, that's his job. He helps people. Well, what kind of things does he help people with? Well, if they've got struggles in their life and, like marriage problems and stuff like that. And then there was a couple of them, the light bulb went on. So he helps people with marriage problems. Yeah. So he's like a love guru. So I'm going to talk to you today as the love guru, okay? So I've been thinking since Josh told me about that I maybe should grow a ponytail and start wearing a long tunic and some robes and, sandals and stuff like that. And then you guys could all refer to me, instead of Pastor Dallas, Love Guru Dallas. You guys okay with that? Yeah, there's some people nodding their heads. Maybe grow my beard a bit longer. Yeah. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to teach your kids about sexuality and your grandkids, because things have changed, believe it or not. So our culture has two big ideas about sexuality that are sort of dominating everything else. And there's lots of other ideas as well, but these are the two ideas that have really stood out to me lately. The first one is that sexuality is the highest expression of love between two people. So the ultimate expression of love is sexuality or sex. And this is why in our culture there's this idea that your whole identity is wrapped up in your sexuality. Whatever your sexuality is, that defines who you are. And that's why in our culture, among younger people, we go to such extreme lengths to figure out what our sexuality is. And there's many, many different expressions of sexuality in our culture now. And that's why, we are soon running out of letters in the alphabet for, the different kinds of sexuality. There's LGBTQ, 2+, and so on and so forth. All of these things are different expressions of sexuality, and it all comes back to sexuality is so extremely important that we have to figure out exactly how this defines our identity in some way. Now, the second dominant thought about sexuality in our culture is that it's just a physical experience that should not impact you emotionally at a very deep level. You should be able to experience it just like another form of massage, really. And you should be able to have numerous sexual partners and walk away and never think about it again. So let me just summarize this for a minute. Our culture is telling us that your whole identity revolves around your sexuality. That really doesn't matter. What? How do you get that to jive? Like, you should be able to have sex and it doesn't really matter at all, but yet it's the most important thing about you. Is there any wonder why there's so much confusion in this? Why our culture is so mixed up? On the one hand, it's not supposed to mean anything, but on the other hand, it's supposed to mean everything. It's hard to grow up in our culture today. It's very hard to be a good parent in our culture today. So let me just, for the sake of full disclosure, tell you about our situation. Shelley and I have been married now for 27 years. We've got 3 kids, all of them in their 20s. All of them are straight, and none of them are married, and all of them are virgins. All of them went to public school, and our youngest one, Josh, went to Catholic high school. The other ones went to public school all the way through. Now, for some of you, that probably says, wow, that's amazing. For other ones of you, it's probably going, yeah, you have really no experience at this parenting thing. Obviously, your kids were different than normal kids, so you don't really have the authority or experience to be able to speak to this topic. Well, the truth is, our experience will color the way I see things and the way I interpret what the Bible has to say, that's for sure. But my experience and my perspective is not really the important thing here. I'm going to try to put my experience and perspective to the side and look at Jesus' perspective on this topic this morning. But I just wanted you to know kind of the lenses of experience that I'm bringing to the table this morning. So, I want to look at the Bible, and you need to understand how the Bible isn't a religious book. If you're not really overly familiar with that, it's not like a sacred text like a lot of other religious books are. The Bible is actually a compilation of love notes that God slipped to a whole bunch of different people at different points in history. And we actually are reading other people's mail. We get to sort of eavesdrop on their love note that they got from God. And so today I want to look at a passage in John. So John is pretty close to the end of the Bible. If you're looking on your app or in an actual physical Bible, you'll have to go quite a ways towards the back or scroll down quite a ways to John. Now there's 4 different Johns in the back of the Bible. The first one is just called John, and then there's 3 little letters called 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. And I don't know why they were titled that way, but we're looking at just John. And chapter 15, and 2 verses in there, verse 12 and 13. And this is Jesus speaking, and he says, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you." And then he goes on to say, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." So you remember me saying context is everything, especially because we're reading somebody else's mail here. So the whole chapter here of John chapter 15 is talking about the importance of staying connected to God's love and then passing it on to others. And so Jesus' whole life revolved around loving people. And he came to die for people as an expression of his love. And that's, if you've heard the term gospel, that's the essence of the gospel, that Jesus loved human beings, us, so profoundly that he actually paid the ultimate price and died so that we could experience a loving relationship with God. So that is the ultimate expression of love. Now, in our culture, we have our partners, like our marriage partners, our spouses, and so on, that we see as the ultimate, or imagine as the ultimate expression of love. At least ideally, that's what we're hoping for. Now, if you look at your marriage relationship in the light of what Jesus just said here, of laying down your life for the other person, the truth is, in marriage, we should be prepared to actually sacrifice our life for our spouse. But in all honesty, we don't necessarily do that. Most of us probably never will actually lay down our life physically for our spouse, but we should be prepared to do that if we are encountering an emergency where that is required. So the question then becomes, what does laying down my life for my spouse, the ultimate expression of love, look like while I'm still alive? like in everyday situations? What does it look like to lay down your life for the person you love, for your spouse? Well, I want to look at another passage here, and it doesn't at first glance look like it's related, but let me just unpack it for you. So I want to go a little bit closer towards the middle of the Bible in Matthew. Matthew is the very first book of the New Testament, which is the last 1/3 of the Bible. And the very last chapter of Matthew is chapter 28, and the very last verses of that chapter are 18 through 20, and that's what I want to read. So there it says, "Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age.'" So these are Jesus' parting words to his followers. The last thing he said to them before he left earth and went back to heaven. So here's the context of this particular passage. The Jews, and Jesus was a Jew, and he taught the Jews while he was here on earth. The Jews had been warned by God not to mix with other nationalities. And they had slipped up in this area a number of times and started associating with their neighbors and with people of other nationalities. And inevitably, it led to bad things happening. They would get mixed up in other religious ideas, and those religious ideas would lead them astray, and they would end up doing bad things that would come back to haunt them, and all kinds of tragedy resulted from that. And that this had repeated itself over and over and over again in their history. And I can just imagine the evening news in Jerusalem. And the news reporter says, yeah, another Jewish person associated with somebody from another nationality. And how's it the song goes? Another one bites the dust. You know, they just see how it's unraveled and their life is falling apart. So Jesus, he counteracts this idea in his teaching here in these last words he gives to his followers. And he says, now, I know you have been sticking to yourselves and trying to stay safe from all of these other people all of your life. And when you haven't, it's gone bad. But now, I'm telling you, I want you actually to go to all these other people all over the world, and I want you to teach them about me and what I'm teaching you now. And here's the deal. I will be with you wherever you go. And I believe this is the ultimate expression of what it looks like to lay down your life for another person while you're still alive. To be there with them, be there for them, no matter what happens in their life. No matter where they end up, you are always there for them. And so, what that looks like at a very practical level between two spouses is that you are there for each other physically, so you don't abandon each other, but emotionally as well. And emotionally might even be more important. What that means is that you give the other person your full, undivided attention. You are literally connecting with everything they say. And this is easier said than done. The longer you are married, the more stuff you have going on in your life, the easier it is to start taking the other person for granted. And guys, we never do this, do we? We never watch TV while our spouse is talking to us, do we? Girls, we never are actually on our phone when our husband is talking to us, are we? We just never do that. We always give them our full, undivided attention, right? We never just listen out of one ear while we're doing something else. We are there for them. See, the truth is, and this is the painful truth, we so easily get distracted. We so easily get distracted from each other. And I'm actually going to say something here that may be a little bit of ouch, but I think we actually need to be distracted. See, I think many of us carry deep wounds in our soul. And when we're not distracted, that pain starts to come to the surface, and we don't like that. That feels yuck. And so staying distracted just feels better. It feels numbing. And so we easily live our lives continuously numbing that inner pain so that we don't have to face it. And we damage our relationships in the process. Our relationships with our friends, with our kids, and with the love of our life. And we end up not being there for them because we're trying to stay numbed. And you say, well, what's this got to do with sex? See, great sex comes out of a relationship where people are fully devoted to one another, physically and emotionally. And when that's the case, it actually gets better and better over time. Now, our culture, Hollywood in particular, doesn't necessarily portray it that way. They portray that, the illegitimate, new, exciting person, that's the person that you have great sex with. But that's not really the way it works. Research is very clear that when spouses are fully devoted to one another and there for each other, over time, their sexual relationship gets better and better. Faithfulness, emotionally and physically, actually leads and sex follows. But our culture says it's the other way around. Our culture says great sex is what leads to a good relationship. And that's not true. Otherwise, all of these people that are displaying great sexual relationships would be the ones that would be married the happiest and the longest. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that Hollywood is not really showing us great long-term relationships. So, what has this all got to do with teaching your kids about sex? Well, here's what I want to submit to you. Teaching your kids about sex is actually all in the modeling. It's more caught than taught. Doesn't mean that you don't have to teach anything. But it does mean that you are teaching, whether you realize it or not, just by the way you talk about and react to the topic of sexuality in your home. Your example is the most powerful teaching tool in the world. So let's just get practical here for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to go through this quickly because I don't think that this is the most important thing to know about teaching your kids about sexuality, although it is probably the thing we focus on the most as parents often. And this comes from a resource from an organization in the U.S. called Focus on the Family, and they have offices here in Canada as well. And I put a link in your notes to this resource. It's called The Talk. And it explains what is important at different stages of your child's development and how some practical tips for that. So I'm just going to walk through this and pick out a few little highlights that I think are important, and then you can look it up later and go through the whole thing. So for the first 3 years of a child's life, the most important thing you can teach them is bonding. How to be there for each other is modeled by the way your attentiveness to your child is played out in your relationship with them. And there's been a lot of research in this area in the last 25, 30 years showing that your bond with your parents, your emotional bond with them, actually is reflected in your bond with your spouse later on in life. So if you have a good bond emotionally with your parent, you'll end up easily bonding well with a spouse later on in life. Some other things that are important as well, of course, is protecting your child from sexual abuse of any kind, and then helping your child feel good about their body, whether they're a girl or a boy, feeling positive about being what they were created. Then ages 4 through 7. So there, again, the big thing is just teaching your child not to be ashamed of their body. Whether you're a female or a male, they need to feel good about what they are. And again, this is more caught than taught. So the way you feel about your body is going to be projected onto them, and they pick up on that. And of course, teaching them about general terms of reproduction and appropriate and inappropriate touch. Unfortunately, that was something that you used to not have to talk about until kids were in their teen years. But now you have to talk about that with your kids, even in their elementary school years. And another thing that's important is recognizing that your kids are going to hear about sex in school. So you need to teach them that you are a far better teacher about sexuality than their peers are. Their friends are not going to give them good information. So they need to feel comfortable to ask you about that. And parents, I know this is awkward. I know there will be cringe moments for you, but you do far better having your kids talk to you about it, even if it makes you blush, than to have them talking to their friends about it. Because their friends are not going to tell them what you want them to do. So keep that door open. Try to stay ahead of their friends. So you talk to them before their friends do, so that they're not hearing it for the first time in distorted ways. Then ages 8 to 12. Now this is probably the key age where you really need to be tuned into your child as a parent. So you need to prepare your child for the physical changes that are coming in their own body, and then give them good information about sexuality and how it belongs within marriage. Our culture is not giving any moral teachings whatsoever regarding sexuality. It's being communicated as an amoral topic where whatever feels good to you is fine. So you as the parent are the only voice likely that's going to be speaking to them around sexuality in moral terms. So you need to make sure that you use your voice in that regard. So talk about it in clear terms without making sexuality a bad thing. You don't want to set your child up to see it as something that's dirty and shameful later on when they're married. And I've met lots and lots of couples who grew up in families where parents were too embarrassed to talk about it openly, so they just shamed their children about it. Like, oh, we don't talk about that, you know. And so it created such an emotional blockage in their children that they later on could not go there in marriage and have a good sex life. And that's what we ultimately want for our children. So bring up and talk to them about pornography, about masturbation, premarital sex, about homosexuality, transgender stuff, sexually transmitted diseases, all of those things. You need to talk about it, but use a compassionate voice when they're talking about things like this that their kids' friends are talking about. Don't talk about their friends in judgmental ways, like, oh, they're, those bad people. They shouldn't be thinking or talking about that. Don't go there. Just talk about it with a sense of compassion. When people are drawn to sexuality, often it's an escape mechanism from pain. It's a numbing thing. And so you need to talk to your kids using a voice of compassion. That sense that, well, isn't it sad that at that age they feel such a need to be involved sexually? They're still children. They should be able to just enjoy their childhood still. And so when you give your child that view of the conversations going on around them, it creates a sense of security in your child to be a child. They don't feel insecure that they need to become something, an adult, before the time. Yeah. Well, that's where a wisdom of a parent is very, very important, to talk to them in a age-appropriate way. But I think the key thing to understand is that they are already hearing those conversations at school in a distorted way. So your role is to bring clarity from a mature perspective so that they are not just going along with what everybody says and accepting that as if that's the right way to look at it. So really you're helping them have a mature perspective on what they're already being exposed to. So I agree, it could be overwhelming, but it's better that you are walking them through that sense of overwhelming than that your kids are just gobbling it up without anybody helping them process it. Does that make sense? So the other thing that you want to talk about at this stage is body shaming and sexual profanity, because they're going to be exposed to that. And you want to reinforce privacy boundaries, especially with the technology that we have nowadays. There's all kinds of sexuality that's being transmitted through texting and things like that you want to be making sure your kids understand about and don't get involved in a way that's going to harm them. So then the last stage is in the teen years. And here, there's a number of different things, of course, that you're going to be walking with them in. But I think one of the key things that we can do as parents at this stage is normalize the struggle with self-image and attraction issues. It's normal for kids to have a time where they're wrestling with this stuff. And maybe it's been a while since you were a teenager and you've forgotten your own inner struggles. But it is normal, especially with all of the different mixed signals that our kids are getting now. And so to open the door for them to have conversations about this, even if it's hard for you to listen to what's going on inside of them, it's much better if they're talking about it and they've got you to hold their hand, so to speak, through this journey than for you to just try to keep a lid on it and hope for the best. You're much better off to open the door and just walk with them. And the other thing I would say that's very important in the teen years is to reassure them that if they make a mistake in their struggle, there is grace and forgiveness. So many Christian parents are so uptight about their kids messing up that they communicate inadvertently this sense of angst that causes the child to feel like, if I mess up here, my life is over. And there's so much anxiety there that kids don't dare to say anything to their parents, and they wrestle with it, and if they make mistakes, they're all alone in that mistake. So you want to make sure you're communicating to your child, look, I don't want you to make a mistake, but if you do, don't feel like I'm going to kick you out or I'm going to yell and scream at you or whatever. I am there for you. I will always love you. You will always be my child. I will help you. I'll walk with you. We will get through this together. So your whole goal, and make sure you have this goal clearly articulated with your spouse, is ultimately you want your child to grow up to have a good, healthy sex life. That's the goal. The goal is not that they never embarrass you. The goal is not that they be totally naive about all things sexual when they get married or when they start dating. Your goal is not that their friends are going to laugh at them because they don't have a clue about sexuality. Your goal is that they will be secure in themselves and in their sexuality and be able to grow into a healthy sexuality within marriage that will last for a lifetime. You want them to know the truth. And the more you talk about this in a natural way with your child, the more likely that is to happen. And I say this particular question that I'm going to raise right now is a good question for you to ask with your parents or with your kids in any situation. Ask yourself, is this a moral issue or is this a maturity issue? If it's a moral issue, you want to teach morality. If it's an immaturity, you don't punish immaturity. You help them grow towards maturity. And that is very, very important. None of us is perfect in this area. We all have hang-ups, and some of us have hang-ups in the area of sex as well. But love inspires us to do our best in spite of our hang-ups, and then we trust God to just do the rest. Shelley and I often joked when our kids were growing up that we weren't saving for their post-secondary education, we were saving for their counseling. Our wonderful government here in Canada has given us the opportunity for RESPs. I think they probably should have RCSPs. Registered counseling savings plans for our kids. Because let's face it, we all have hang-ups. So, I don't have any text questions yet, so I'm just going to wrap up here. And I ran across a story, is actually the lady herself that this happened to told me about this, and it just really kind of grabbed my attention. She was talking about this time when she was folding laundry. And her daughter, I think her daughter was around 5 or 6 at the time, was there with her on the couch as she was folding laundry. And lo and behold, as she was folding, some of her fancy lingerie was in the basket. Some of you moms can identify with this moment right now. And so the mom was very tempted to just cover that and not say anything, but this mom was different. She took out her beautiful lingerie and she was folding it, and the daughter's eyes got big. She had never seen anything like this before. And she goes, "Wow, Mommy, what is that?" And so she said, "Well, this is my underwear. Do you think it's pretty?" And she says, "Yeah, it's very pretty." And she said, "Yeah, I think it's really pretty too. And your daddy really likes it when I wear this." And her daughter's eyes were just big, and she's like, "Wow. And I really like wearing it because your daddy really likes it when I wear it." And you could tell that the wheels were really turning in this little girl's mind. And after a minute, she says, "Someday when I grow up, I'm going to have some really pretty underwear that my husband is really going to like too." That's what I'm talking about when I say your attitude is what your kids will catch. See, this mother had a healthy attitude about her sexual relationship with her husband, and that got communicated to her little daughter in a very beautiful, natural way. So my question for all of us here today is, what are you teaching your kids or your grandkids about sex through your example? I'm going to wrap up here, but I recognize that this topic is pretty sensitive for a lot of us. Trust me, it was awkward for me even getting up here to talk about this, even being the love guru that I am. But the way that I could face that is because Jesus helps me. He helps me face life, even the stuff that's awkward and painful, head on. And maybe you are watching today or you're here today and you have never met Jesus and you need some help facing life head on. Hurts, hang-ups, habits, whatever. Teaching your kids about sex. Maybe you could use some help. Let me introduce you to Jesus. Just like he helps me, I think he would love to help you. And so in a minute, if you're in that boat and you would like to meet Jesus, you'd like his help in your life, you'd like him to change your life, to heal some of those hurts, why don't you open your heart and invite him in? Maybe you can pray along with me. And then I also want to pray for all of us that Jesus would shape the way we see our sexuality. And that our body language, our attitudes will communicate the right things to our kids and our grandkids. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, I thank you that you help us even with stuff that's hard, feels awkward, maybe even painful. So many people have faced sexual abuse in our culture. And for them, pain is just a normal part of sexuality. I pray, Lord Jesus, that you would heal all of us. I pray that you would come into our hearts and that you would transform the painful parts into healed parts. You would redeem those bad things that happened so that we could be genuinely loving. And I pray, Jesus, that you would help all of us to be able to communicate to our kids a healthy, joyful, respectful, and a genuinely loving sense of sexuality so that they can grow up to be all that you created them to be. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.